Hi, welcome back to Lawyerist Lens. We are here moments after Apple hit $1 trillion in valuation, so it seems really appropriate to be talking to Marshall about a page we just launched on Lawyerist about design thinking for lawyers, what it is, why it's important, since Apple is a company that is built on great design, and if they can hit $1 trillion, maybe lawyers should be paying attention.
I think that's right. I think we ought to be. I think we ought to be paying attention, and I think we have a track record of not being great at innovation. So.
I mean, I'm a big fan of design thinking, but maybe you can introduce us to the concept so that we understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, it has always been a struggle for lawyers to think about process improvement and incrementally making their law firms better as an exercise in design.
Yeah.
Right? They find a quick problem. They try a quick solution, and then they usually roll with it because they don't have time to go back to that problem.
I think you've nailed one of the big things, which is like design thinking is the opposite of believing you have a fix.
That's right.
It's like the Platonic or the Socratic ideal of approaching every problem like you don't know the answer.
It's right, and I think it is also the ethos of saying, I have a whole bunch of things that I can improve, and I always want to be on the lookout for how to do that. And even more important than that is the idea that there is a process that you can follow. It is a repeatable process that you can follow to find problems and incrementally improve them systematically.
Do you remember off the top of your head what all the steps are?
Well, so one of the things, as I was writing this post, one of the things that became quite clear is people have a whole different idea about what how you delineate the steps.
Yeah, I have
steps and 5 steps.
I think you use the traditional Stanford 6 steps. I usually cut it down to 4, and
Yeah, right. So step 1 is really thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve.
Trying to understand it fully.
Correct. And key to that is the idea that you need to think about it not in terms of why it's a problem for you or your team or your business or whatever. The brilliant part about the way that Apple, at $1 trillion worth of valuation, thinks about it is what makes this beautiful and simple and problem solving for our users. Why was the iPod such a transcendent piece of design? It was not because it was the first MP3 player. It wasn't. It was the first MP3 player that was simple, intuitive, and beautiful.
I think the core of it is we often come in with the solution, and in design thinking really insists that we make sure that we are analyzing the problem.
I think that's right.
Like there's an example, Rocket Matter is a law practice management software vendor, and I remember years ago, their users said, we really just want an Outlook calendar in Rocket Matter. Just give us Outlook in Rocket Matter. So Larry and Ariel was the designer at the time. They basically went out and purchased an Outlook module that was basically Outlook in Rocket Matter, and nobody liked it. Because people asked for the solution, and this, Rocket Matter is very good at design, so this is more of a lesson that they had to relearn about. Don't listen to people who come to you with the solution they want. Make sure you keep asking why until you understand the problem. And designers sometimes talk about like the 5 whys or the 7 whys or the infinite whys, and because you keep asking why do you want that until you actually understand the core problem.
Why do you need it in your practice management system? Because it's easier. Why?
Yeah. And you could get all the way back to what I'm really trying to do is make sure that I know where to be at all times during the day, and so that I can schedule an appointment with clients. We are all conditioned for that to look like a calendar, but it's possible that you could come up with a whole different concept of what a calendar needs to be that's better.
That's right.
Maybe.
So step 1 is approaching any improvements that you need to make from the perspective of defining the problem and not assuming that you have the solution or that the solution has been thought up, or that even the hubris of thinking that you are the right person to come up with the solution. And so first you define that problem, and then we'll move to some other steps.
Start thinking through like what some solutions might be.
That's right. Yeah. So, for example, one of the sticky problems in lawyering right now, particularly in small and solo law firms, is client intake.
Yeah.
Right? it's hard to systematize your client intake. You have goals as a law firm about why you need to intake clients. There's a very practical part of that. That's just like getting data so that you can start doing work and earning dollars. But there's a whole nother part of it that has to do with the experience of being taken in, right? And clients have varying degrees of enjoyment in that process. And it's the thing that I like about design thinking is we have already designed all of these experiences. Most of us just have designed them in really crappy ways because we haven't spent any time on it.
Or just set it and forget it. And never, but like, doing that sort of the research with the stakeholders, your clients, and what are your goals coming into this room? What are your goals coming, in the intake process, and trying to explore that with them is really key. And not bringing your own ego to it and assuming that you know how to do it.
And staff, right? Oftentimes the people who drive client intake are staff members in your office. Maybe it's a virtual receptionist. Maybe it is a paralegal or an administrative assistant or a receptionist, however you define those different things. And getting all of those folks to weigh in on what the pinch points are in the client intake process and where they have trouble.
And just how could we improve it?
How can we improve it? And recognizing that is a thing and that there is a process you can follow to make that thing better.
So once you get to the point where you really understand the problem, you have started to understand it better, and you've drawn some insight from interviewing stakeholders, trying to figure it out, you start thinking through possible solutions. Here's where I think one of the really key pieces of the design process comes in, which is don't build them right away. Test them in prototype, and prototype and test.
Yeah, and before you get to prototype and there's kind of an in-between there, and this is why sometimes it's useful to think about it as 6 steps instead of 3 or 4. Totally. Because in there, it's really easy to forget the process of brainstorming and ideating, right? You've defined your problem, and the inclination you might have is to jump right into a solution, because in the process
it seems obvious to you.
Because in the process of defining the problem, you've been like, oh well, obviously the fix to that is X, Y, or Z. And so I think that there's a really important focus to be put on the exercise of brainstorming.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
And it happens not just with you at a computer typing away, right? You go back to those stakeholders and you do this brainstorming exercise to solve the problem.
Check your assumptions at every stage, right? That's one of the themes going through the whole thing is don't assume you know the solution, don't assume you understand the problem, all that stuff. Yeah.
If your solution is based on people having access to a computer, that has the potential to create friction somewhere along the way. And so it may be great for automation, it may be great for your experience on the receiving side, but what if you're trying to serve a client base that doesn't have access to a computer? Right? What if you are a criminal defense lawyer that responds to DWI calls from people in the Hooskow?
And ideally what comes out of that brainstorming process is 1 or 2 or 3 things that you can prototype and test.
Yes.
And by prototype and test, the best way to do it is like on paper with sketches.
Yeah, something...
Not like building something expensive.
Right. Something usable, something that allows a user to have an experience with the solution without having to build the entire solution from tip to tail.
One thing I've seen website designers do is they will sketch out the website with the important details on paper, and they'll put it in front of a test user. Like if you're testing your law firm website, you would put it in front of a potential client, and you ask them to, click a menu item by touching the page, and then you put a new page down in front of them, because it costs almost nothing to spend an hour drawing out pages on a website.
Yeah.
And if they touch something you didn't anticipate, you just quickly draw it and stick it in front of them and let them do the next stage.
Yeah.
Which I love. It costs nothing.
What a cool way to come up with this.
Arts and crafts.
So it might, right? But it might be Post-it notes on a wall that a user can come in and do that same thing. It might be a really simple Google form. So if you're not comfortable with Google Forms yet, or a bunch of other really simple tools out there like Typeform, for example, they're really quick and easy to use.
A lot of people just use like Keynote or PowerPoint.
Sure.
Like I was listening to a book, a Sprint, where they were talking about helping a hotel prototype a robotic assistant that would like bring you your toothbrush if you needed one. and all it was like an iPad with screen share going, and somebody was quickly switching slides on the back end using Keynote or PowerPoint, and like piece of cake. Like you can do that, and it was like a trash can with an iPad on it, and somebody just like slid it in front of the door.
Right.
So you can even prototype robots with almost no money.
So one of the great anecdotes about why we do this, why we don't design in a vacuum, just goes back to the way that products used to get launched, right? It used to be the case that somebody would come up with an idea, engineering would come up with a prototype of that idea, and then they would go lock themselves in the basement, and they would take a bunch of capital to do this,
right.
bunch of money, and spend a bunch of money and time, and sometimes years, and they would come back out of their hole and be like, okay, here's the product that we created, and then they launch it.
Which is a big bet.
It's a huge bet, and it's a bet based on, again, hubris. It's a bet based on the idea that you have correctly identified the problem, that you have identified the exact correct solution the first time, and that given unlimited capital resources, you are able to build that thing and launch it in a profitable and meaningful way.
Yeah.
And that proved to be sometimes a good choice, but very often disastrous.
And that hubris often gets in our way, and the whole design process is designed to minimize your like ego investment in the project, because if somebody doesn't like your scribbles on a page, you just throw them out and start scribble new things. You know, or like, you know, a practical example, it astonishes me, but lots of lawyers still need to be persuaded that accepting credit cards is important. But you can accept credit cards for almost no money and then send different invoices to different clients and see which ones get paid faster, right? Like it's an easy thing to test, and at the end of the month or in a one pay cycle, you have an answer and you can run with it, and you've invested almost no time in it.
You don't have to wonder anymore.
Yeah. So
the other thing, while we're on the topic of hubris, and I hate to go back to taking a step back to the brainstorming part of this, but one of the opportunities that lawyers have in the design thinking process is figuring out a way to get their own ego out of the way.
I think it's harder for us. Really, because we give advice and people should listen.
I think that's right. And the challenge with it, and this also gets mixed up in your skills as a manager, which I think we're actually going to talk about later. Sometimes lawyers don't have the greatest skills as a manager, and what happens or can happen is that people who work around that lawyer sometimes think that they are best when they say yes to the lawyer. And so it's entirely possible that you go into a brainstorming session or a design thinking cycle with a goal of being removed without having ego, with removing that hubris.
You have gravity just sitting at that table.
There's there's an inborn, inherent perception of power differential that you need to actively fight against to encourage your people to say, this is a crazy idea, boss. But what if we, that takes a lot for some people.
And some of that's culture.
It is.
Which is a whole different conversation.
It totally is.
But no, you're right. And sometimes it's a good reason to remove yourself from the room, or employ other tricks to extract those good brainstorms from people. That's a really good
thinking for your brainstorming process.
Yeah, totally.
That's a reasonable thing to do.
And so once you've tested a prototype, it's either worked or it hasn't. You can evaluate what worked, and you either build it or back up and try another prototype, right?
That's right. So there's a book out there that isn't particularly focused on law firms, but it's called The Lean Startup. And The Lean Startup talks a lot about how you can build a product or service using design thinking and frame it in a way that uses startup-like language.
Because you can design the business model too, which is basically what Lean Startup is all about.
That's exactly right. And so as you're thinking about this problem, the idea is, first of all, fail fast, right? You don't want to implement a process that is destined to be a failure, or too expensive, or slowing down your process, or introducing inefficiencies. You want to learn that early so that you can dump it and fix it. And so failing fast is important. And then that's right, the next choice you have to make is either to pivot, which is figure out why you were approaching it the wrong way,
Yep.
and decide whether you have to approach it from a totally different way
You may
altogether.
start over entirely.
You could
Yep.
scrap it, go right back to the beginning of your design thinking cycle.
Yep.
Or you persevere. You say, we are close, and all this needs is a couple of little tweaks, and with those little tweaks, we can launch. We can go live.
Iteration.
Iteration
even.
is
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, so we've hit kind of right, because the design thinking process is never done.
That's right.
You get to the end, and you always start over once you get to the end, because you're trying to improve it constantly. And that's iteration. So you either start over because your idea was terrible and sucks and you've got to start over, or it worked, but it can be better, and so you go back to the beginning and improve it, and you just keep doing that over and over and over again.
That's right,
Yeah.
which probably just scared the hell out of a whole bunch of people, because we're not talking about practicing law.
Yeah.
We're talking about process improvement. We're talking about running a better business. We're talking about revisiting a problem that you already visited once and put away.
I mean, I think you're right. It does scare people because, like at our company, nothing is ever finished, right? We are constantly tweaking the way we do things because there are always opportunities to improve them, and that has to be true in a law firm too, because the law changes, because your clients' expectations change. Everything changes, and you can always improve it. So
one of the big criticisms of our industry is that we set it and forget it like 4 decades ago.
there are lawyers still using Windows XP.
There are lawyers that don't use computers, Sam.
Yes, we know. Yeah, I know. We know that now.
And so if it's true that we did set it and forget it a long
Yeah.
time ago, that's both terrifying, but it's also, for me, gives space for a lot of optimism, which is
Yeah.
to say, if we get into a cycle where lawyers, and particularly small and solo lawyers, are at the forefront of this, innovating in ways that we know work. There is data out there about why design thinking works and how
Right.
it improves
This is
outcomes.
not a fad. It's
this
just
is
not a fad.
We're not.
$1 trillion company.
That's right. There it is. If we can do that, and if we can systematize thinking and process improvement, we will find ways to innovate out of many decades of what a lot of people think is a very stagnant industry.
You know, I should have led with this, but Nicole Braddock, our friend, who is now a designer and designs legal solutions, especially in access to justice. In case lawyers are afraid of design thinking, she calls it structured problem solving.
Now that is a lawyer way to talk about
It
design
is, but
thinking.
I think most lawyers employ design thinking when it comes to solving legal problems instinctually. It's what we're trained to do in law school, but we don't take that same perspective on like trying to, going and researching, trying out ideas for the way to solve this legal problem or to win this legal argument. We try it out on our associates, on our colleagues, and then we bring it to the courtroom, and on the fly we tweak it and iterate on, like, we do that, but we don't do it with our businesses. And all I think we're saying is that if we did,
We'd be good at it.
we'd be good at it. And the thing is, like, we know lawyers don't use computers. Lawyers are out of date. Lawyers don't even care about the client experience. If you care, like if you put a modicum of effort in, and the way to do it, to really do it well, is design thinking. If you put that effort in, you can win. You can take over a market from those lawyers without computers, or who just don't care, or who aren't trying very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't make you fearful. It might, and we
Should make you
recognize that.
Fucking excited.
It should make you so excited. Yeah. And so one of my favorite lines from the Post was, lawyers and innovation go together like Nutella and moderation, right? We are really, really bad at innovating, but that doesn't have to be the way. And
That's
so
true.
for people who are out there who are afraid and are feeling like innovation is innovation in their business systems and in the business of law is too much to handle, I love that analogy, Sam, that
Yeah.
we are in the business of creatively solving problems, and we do it every day, and we are really, really good at
Yeah.
it. Transactional lawyers and litigators
Just
and
expand
regulatory lawyers. Just for a second, think about ways that you can
Yeah.
take that skill set and layer it on top of running a great business. And it does excite me. It gets me fired up because the sky's the limit when we have an army of small and solo lawyers out there trying to innovate the way that clients come into the legal services industry, the way that they leave the legal services industry, the way that we solve access to justice problems. All of those things can be impacted in meaningful ways through design thinking, and so that's why I had a hoot right in the Post.
Cool. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for walking us through it, Marshall.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.